As an independent researcher, consultant, and fellow with the Opportunity Institute, Carrie Hahnel works on improving systems of school finance, resource allocation, and accountability. Last year, she spoke at this conference, and many students, myself included, selected her presentation as among the most useful they heard. So get your journals ready. Carrie, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me back, Said. It is a pleasure to be here. It really was a highlight of my summer last year to be able to spend some time with so many students from around the state. For policy and data geeks like me, we speak with a lot of folks who are in Sacramento, a lot of researchers and journalists, but really the key stakeholder in our public education system is the student. And so to have hundreds of students together today to talk about what they're experiencing and how they can create change in their schools and in their communities, it's such an honor. So thank you for having me. Like Said said, I'm going to talk to you today about what it means to make change in your school and community and how you can use data to do that. I'm going to share my slides with you now. And be warned, I have a lot of detail that I'm going to be taking us through, and we're going to also be taking a tour through some live websites. So hopefully the tech works out as we go through this. My slides should be up on the screen. So let's jump in. I'm going to introduce you today to something that I have called the Changemakers Toolkit. And the idea here is to give you some really practical, useful tools, links to websites, and suggestions for how to navigate them so that you can get the data you need to be a successful advocate in your community. My name, like Zaid said, is Carrie Hahnel. I come to this work from the Opportunity Institute, where I am a research and policy fellow. I'm also a fellow with PACE, the Policy Analysis for California Education Research Center based at Stanford. And in both of those organizations, I conduct research, I advance policy, I collaborate with advocates and policymakers to try to improve schools, and most importantly, to improve educational equity across California and also nationally. And in those roles, I have had the opportunity to work with a lot of data. I am very familiar with California's network of sometimes complex and sometimes really fabulous data systems. So I'm excited to share some of those with you today. And I've also had the opportunity to work closely with school districts and looking at their plans. And so we're also going to talk about how the data connects to what districts are actually doing, what their plans for change are, and how you can influence those. Start with a quote. If I were in a setting where I could actually see you and talk with you, I'd have one of you read this. But instead, I'm going to begin with it. And it reads, "Knowledge is power, information is power. The secreting or hoarding of knowledge or information may be an act of tyranny camouflaged as humility." And that's by Robin Morgan, a feminist activist. And I love this quote because we often hear the first part of it, knowledge is power, but we rarely hear the second part, which is a reminder that those who keep knowledge to themselves are also concentrating and maintaining power. And those who hoard information about our schools, whether it's information about how they're spending the money or which students are getting which services, which students are going to college, they may be well-intentioned and aiming to do work on your behalf, and in many ways they probably are, but they're also helping to maintain the status quo. And as I'm sure you know, as those with lived experience in our system, the status quo is not always equitable. So to build more just schools, we need to share knowledge broadly so a broader set of stakeholders, yourselves included, can be part of its change. So that brings me back to today's session. Public schools are accountable to the public. You are the public. That means schools are accountable to you. But to be engaged and informed as an advocate and as somebody who may have a seat at the table, you've got to do your homework. As a student leader, you want to lift up ideas that can help improve your school, your district, your community, maybe the state as a whole, but you want to pair those ideas with data and evidence-based solutions. So today we're going to talk about how you can get that information. Okay, data. I would love to start with a poll. I'm going to kick it over to Cassie and ask her to pull up the poll. And the question here is, what is your general attitude toward data? There's no right or wrong answer. You can check multiple of these if you'd like, but I want to get a sense of how you currently think about data. Okay, Super interesting. So the response I got the most votes is, I always like a good looking or thought-provoking graph. Yes, me too. There are some great tools out there for creating some really fabulous graphics. Second to that was the answer, I know it's important, but I'm not sure how to find it or how to use it. And that's exactly why we're here today. I'm really happy to see only 5% of you think data is boring. I'm hopeful that we can change that. But if not, at least give you the tools you need so that when you have to dig into the data, you know where to get it. And I give mad props to the 21% who want to dig into the raw data set. Me too. Okay, so let's talk about this Changemakers Toolkit once again. I am going to introduce you to 5 topics. We're going to talk about where to get the data, where to find the policy, where to read the plan that describes what the district or school is doing. Very briefly, we're going to touch on how to seek out promising evidence-based solutions, and then we're going to talk about the critical importance of asking questions. If you are taking notes as we go through this, you could choose to organize your notes around these 5 topics, because that's how my slides are organized. I know you have journals. I'm hoping that you can take a few seconds to think about a change you would like to see, something that you'd like to work on either in your school or your district or in your broader community. And it could be something really specific. Maybe you already have a campaign in mind or an issue that you're working on, like reducing the presence of police on campus or increasing mental health counselors. Or maybe you have just a general idea, maybe something about building relationships and inclusivity, and that's fine. But I'm hoping you can just jot that idea down, because as we go through this, I'm going to throw out some sample ideas and show you how I would find data to support those. So let's start with the data. I hope you have your idea in mind. First, as you think about your idea, you want to understand more about the issue you're tackling or the problem you're trying to solve. As a stakeholder and as an advocate, you want to have facts and figures at your fingertips. There are so many great resources where you can get helpful information about the students in your district, the people who work there, including the teachers and the staff, outcomes like graduation rates and test scores, the money. One of the most important things you can do as an advocate is follow the money. The money tells you what an institution's priorities are. I'm going to show you how to get these data and more as we go through this. On your screen are a few tools that we're going to talk about today: Ed Data, DataQuest, Kids Data, your LCAP, and so on. These are going to be in the slides for you as a resource. There's also a table at the end where I've compiled all of them together. You can bookmark these as we go through so you can come back to them. And if you're the kind of person who can handle 2 screens and you like to kind of follow and do your own thing at the same time, as I pull up one of these tools and show you what I'm looking for in Ed Data, you could do the same for your school or district. Or if you prefer to just relax and follow along, that's totally fine too. Okay, so let's start with a sample idea. Let's say you're interested in higher and more equitable college transition rates. Maybe you've noticed in your school that there are disparities in who's going to college or who has access to those opportunities. I know Ed Trust West, actually an organization I used to work for, talked yesterday about disparities in A to G and college access. The data that I would probably start with are things like graduation rates, A to G completion rates, college matriculation rates, and course taking patterns, knowing that if you don't have the course, you're not going to be eligible. So those are the things that I might start to look at. As I go through these, I'm going to throw out a sample district. I'm going to start looking at some of this data for West Contra Costa Unified. And this is just an example. I don't have a relationship with West Contra Costa Unified. I'm going to throw out some other example districts later. I'm just sharing this because it's a big enough district that it has some data that we can dig into. And to look for the data that I just described, data on A to G and college going and so on, I'm going to look at Ed Data, DataQuest, and then I'm just going to also tell you about, but not pull up, the civil rights data collection. The Ed Data and DataQuest are 2 fabulous tools that are produced by the state of California. They're official California school data, and they each serve a different purpose. And you'll see a little bit of that as we go through. So I'm going to click over to Ed Data, and I'm hoping somebody can just confirm in the chat for me that you can actually see the slides as the websites as I'm going through them. Thank you, Jeff. Terrific. Okay. So Ed Data is a partnership between the California Department of Education, EdSource, which is a news outlet. I think you're going to hear from them tomorrow, and also FCMAT, which supports supports districts when it comes to managing their budgets. And I'm going to begin by searching for Contra Costa County and West Contra Costa School District. You can see that I also have the option of selecting a school, but I'm just going to look for the district right now. You could always come back and look for the school. And what you'll see initially is that there's data organized across these 4 topics: students, staff, local revenues, and financial data. I'm interested right now in students, and specifically in college and career readiness. That's the topic I want to learn about. And you'll see as you scroll through here that there are a bunch of tiles with all these little graphs that show you different metrics. So for instance, I can instantly see that the graduation rate in West Contra Costa is 80%. It's been pretty consistent over time. The dropout rate has declined a little bit from about 8% to about 6%. And the CSU graduation rate, that's the A to G rate, is about 50%. So that's interesting to me as I think about college readiness, because I see that only half of the students in that school district are eligible to even apply to a UC or CSU. Now, maybe there are other pathways in that district. Maybe there's some intentionality around that. But as a student advocate, if that's something that I cared about, I'd want to dig in deeper. So what you can see here is that you do have some options, and this is going to be really tiny on your screen. I apologize, but I don't know how to make it much bigger. But you can disaggregate these charts by all kinds of student demographics. So for instance, if I choose gender, what we'll see here in yellow is that 44.8% of male students are completing the A to G requirements upon graduation, and 54.8% of female students. So there is a very large, actually 10 percentage point gender gap in this school district. So that might raise questions for me around why there are gender disparities, whether all students have the same access or whether it's a culture or climate issue potentially. If I look at the data by race and ethnicity, I can also see patterns there, and they very much in this district mirror what Ed Trust West shared with you yesterday, where we see that white and Filipino students and Asian students in this district have higher graduation rate, A to G graduation rates, than in particular Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander students, and also Latino and Black students. And so again, this raises questions about access, equal access and opportunity. I'd be interested in knowing what kinds of courses are offered to students and which students are enrolling in what kinds of courses. Thank you, Jeff, for dropping the URL into the chat there. So this raises some questions for me that I can come back and think about and ask questions of my school district. I'm also going to look at their LCAP, their plan, to see how they're addressing these disparities. I'm not going to discuss them now, but you can see that this website also includes things on SAT and ACT scores, advanced placement tests, so a really rich treasure trove of data. But one of the things it doesn't do is it doesn't show me how these rates of graduation and A to G are different by school site. Ed Data is terrific at packaging some of the education data into these charts and graphs, but it's not so great at making it comparable for all of the schools in a single school district. And if you want that kind of data, I would suggest going to DataQuest. So this is the next website I'm going to share with you today. This is on the California Department of Education website. And DataQuest is designed to put out there for the public all of the data, or much of the data that the department collects. Their charge is not necessarily to make it really easy to read. And so you'll see that there are fewer charts and graphs here. It is to just make it accessible to the public. And so if you want more detailed data, DataQuest is a good place to look. If you want the data to be packaged in a chart, a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier to use, Ed Data is the place to go. So let's go back to West Contra Costa School District. So I'm going to select district as my level, but you can see you can also search by school site or for the state. And then under subject area, you can see all the topics that they have data around. So they have test scores, they have data on who's enrolled in your school or your district, school climate data, and a bunch of data on graduation and dropouts, and also on college going rates. So that's kind of interesting. And I'm going to click on that because that's the thing that I'm interested in right now. And I'm going to search for West Contra Costa. And you'll see that there are options to see the college going rate for high school students in the district, or to see it with school data. And I love this feature because oftentimes the thing that tells you the most about a community is how the differences in opportunity and outcomes for different schools within that same community. So here are the high schools in West Contra Costa Unified School District. And instantly I see that there are huge differences across these high schools. I see that there's an 81% college going rate at Middle College High School, but only a 46% college going rate at Richmond High School. And then there are some high schools that are kind of in the middle, like De Anza. So knowing a little bit about West Contra Costa, I know that it's a geographically large district with some racial segregation by neighborhood and differences in opportunity based on those neighborhoods, but also that there are different missions around the high schools. So Middle College High School has an express mission of sending kids to college. So likely they're offering a different course of study. But these kinds of things are important to understand as you go to your school district and ask questions about how are we equalizing opportunity across the district. If there are some terrific dual enrollment courses or AP courses at, say, Middle College High or Richmond High or Hercules High, how are we providing access to students from other schools that may not have access to those? What are we doing? So the data is always a launching point for that question, what's next? What are we doing? What's the plan? One of the best things you can do is ask questions about the data. One of the things I want to just point out is remind you of that quote we read about hoarding knowledge. The reality is sometimes the data that you really want isn't going to be available through one of these government websites. It does not mean that it's not out there, but it means that you might have to dig around a little bit to find it. So in West Contra Costa, there's this really terrific advocacy organization called Go Public Schools that works with parents in the community around issues of equity. And they've put out some data, and depending on which district you're in, I'm sure there are many local partners that are also digging more deeply into the data. And this tells me what percentage of graduates from the class of 2018 ended up in a UC the same year. And this is really interesting because it's not just post-secondary rates, but it's UC specifically. And I see those same trends that we saw in the other data, but they really pop in this chart where 27%, nearly 1 in 3 students from Middle College High is going to a UC, but only 6% of students from JFK High. So look around at these kind of official websites, but don't be afraid to go to local partners too and ask them what information they have. And of course, your school district and your school site should have lots of data as well. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears from college readiness and take another example. And this time, my idea is that I want my district to improve student engagement and feelings of connectedness. And likely for many of you, this is a really important issue coming out of COVID. So let's suppose I'm in Sacramento City Unified School District this time. Not to pick on Sac City, but it's another large district with available data, so I'm going to dig into this. And the data that I want to look up this time are things like student absenteeism, school climate surveys, feedback from students on social and emotional health. And I'm going to show you 2 different websites. The first is the California School Dashboard, and the second is Kids Data. California School Dashboard is another website offered by the California Department of Education, and it's a little different from the other ones, and it doesn't just show data, but it shows how districts are doing based on that data. So it provides a value judgment from red being the lowest to blue being the highest, and green being the goal, green being good. And this data is used for accountability purposes in California. So the state and school districts and counties look at this data to determine which schools need additional support and which districts need additional support. Kids data is different from the other ones I've showed you in that it goes beyond just education data. And so if you're interested in data about health and well-being, for instance, it's a terrific source, and it compiles information from dozens of different sources. I am going to go to the California School Dashboard now. Aha, thank you for the tip on how to zoom in. I'll do that if that feels like it will be helpful. Okay, so let's pull up Sacramento City Unified School District. I think this website is hanging. That's interesting. Okay, well, no big deal. So I would encourage you to go to the California School Dashboard when you have a moment and take a look at what data is available for your school site. In regards to student engagement, there are a few indicators that I would suggest looking at. Sorry, I'm going to go back here. There is an indicator on on chronic absenteeism, which will tell you what percentage of students are missing more than 10% of the school days, a really important indicator. There's also some data on school climate surveys. And the caveat that I want to offer you is that you have to click multiple times on the California School Dashboard to get to the substantive information within the climate surveys. You'll see this initial flag that says that the district has met the standard. What that means really is that the district actually did the survey. The standard is simply that you actually ask, your stakeholders what the school climate is like. To me, that's not sufficient. I want to click down and see what they actually learned. And so if you do that, you will learn, for instance, in Sac City, that when they asked about feelings of safety and connectedness and engagement in school, there are big disparities. In fact, for some student groups like foster youth, special education students, Black students, only about half feel safe at school. And if you look at feelings of connectedness, they've actually gone down over time as well. There are disparities for some student groups. So go and look at that data for your school district and see what the district is collecting from you, students, and reporting back to the public about how your school climate is faring. The next website I'll show you is kids data. And this one is super interesting because you have a whole host of data that you don't get on those education websites. So for instance, if we go to data by topic, and look at things like emotional and behavioral health, you can see that there's information on things like alcohol, tobacco, and drug use, youth suicide and self-inflicted injury, children's emotional health. These are really important topics now when we know there's an increase in suicide ideation, depression, anxiety, all of these things that are affecting young people across the state. And as you drill into these, you'll find that you can get the data by gender and grade level, and by a host of other variables. The data are not always, and actually often not available by school district, but you can see them by county. So if we were to click on one of these, for instance, suicidal ideation, you'll see that the data are available by grade level, by county. They're not by individual school district. But if you're trying to launch a campaign to increase mental health workers on campus, for instance, having data on what these rates look like for your county as a whole, for Sacramento County, could be really valuable in making supporting your argument that this is necessary, especially in the times that we're in right now. Okay, so bookmark that. You can go back and dig more into that. Let's keep going. And the last idea that I'm going to share is around fair and effective spending. So you heard me mention earlier that one of the most important things you can do as an advocate is follow the money. A district's spending is going to tell you a great deal about its values and its priorities. There are two ways you can think about the money. The first is the money at the district level. And I know Mary Perry talked to you yesterday about how much the district gets and from where. I'm going to briefly show you where you can find how much your district gets. The next thing that's really important to consider is how much the district is spending on each school site. Does it divide the money equally across all the school sites? Does it send more money to schools with higher needs students? Does it pour more money onto high school campuses that have specialized programs? These are all the kinds of things you can ask when you have that data. The tricky thing is that the data are really hard to get at the school site level. I'll tell you where they are if you are inclined to dig in. If you're one of those 21% who like to access the data files and dig in and do your own analysis, awesome, this is for you. If you're not, that's okay. I would stick maybe with Ed data. So Ed data, we'll go back to that one. We looked at it already, has some really great fiscal data. It's the place, because it partners with FCMAT, is able to pull in all the data on school district spending and make it available to you, the public. And then there's a treasure trove of additional information on finance, including per pupil expenditures at the school level on the California Department of Education website. And those are harder to use. I'm not going to spend time with them today, but I did want you to know about them because it's one of the only places that you can see how much your district is spending on each school. Let's look at Ed data again. And let's look at a different school district this time. Let's look at Los Angeles County, and we'll go to ABC Unified, another large district in LA County. And this time we're going to click on the financial data. These 4 tabs, there's the financial data. And you'll see that you can look at data by revenues and expenditures. Revenues are the money coming in, expenditures are the money going out. Both are important. I'm going to look at the expenditures because that tells me how much they're actually spending. And the general fund means the bulk of the dollars, the general dollars. It puts aside things like debt and some facility costs, but most of what lands in the classroom or at the school site is in the form of general fund expenditures. And in this data table, the column that I'm going to point you to is this one called This District Dollars Per Student. See that red header, dollars per student? And at the bottom, it tells you the total expenditures, $12,200 per student is what this district is spending. Well, is that good or bad? So one way to benchmark that is to look at how much the average unified school district in the state is spending. The average district is spending $13,668, which means that this district is only spending 89% of the average, spending less than average. So one of the questions might be, help me understand more about why we're getting less funding. And there are probably legitimate reasons, probably related to the demographics of the district for the most part, but understanding that is a good place to start. And then after that, you can look at how much the district is spending on different things like certificated personnel, that's teachers. You can see $5,000 per student. That's the majority of the spending. And after that, the next biggest spending line item is employee benefits. Books and supplies, interestingly, is barely anything, $485 per student. So if you're interested in things like increasing access to technology, art supplies in the classroom, musical instruments, one of your questions might be, why are we spending so little? Where's the money going? So this is a great place to start in understanding the district's budget. And you can drill in a great deal there. I'm not going to do that today in the interest of time, but I do want you to know about that terrific resource. So for your homework, we're not going to do this now, but I just want you to jot this down. I want you to search for some data about your district. Go to one of these websites, or 2 of them, whatever seemed interesting to you and relevant to the idea that you documented earlier today. And see if you can find one thing that you learned that surprises you or that makes you want to go deeper. And if you're part of a discussion group, I believe there's a discussion group set up as part of this, work together on it. Share what you learned, share your insight, and hold each other accountable. Ask questions about what you learned about your school or your district from the publicly available data. Maybe also ask, what did you not find that you're going to have to ask your school or district about? Okay, so now we're going to switch gears. We've talked about data at length. We're going to kind of breeze through the remaining topics. Finding the policy. Okay, so now that you have some data, your next step needs to be to understand your district's current policy. So first, let's talk about what a policy is and who sets it. Maybe Brooks Allen spoke with you about this yesterday, but a policy is simply a rule or a law or procedure adopted by some set of decision makers. Like a dress code, for example, is one that you're probably very familiar with. Your school sets policies, your district sets policies, the State Board of Education sets policies, the state legislature, Congress, they all set policies, and all those policies affect your school site, which can make it really complicated. And it means there are layers of laws and regulations governing what happens in school. But let's focus today on the one that's probably most relevant to you, and that's your school district policies. Your school board, your local board of education is tremendously important. They set most of the laws, the policies, the rules, regulations that govern what happens in your school site. The really great thing is that you can read all of them. They're available on a tool called Gamut, and the link is on the slide right here. It's available through the California School Boards Association. There are also state laws that you can read through education code, but they're much denser and it's not always clear which ones pertain to your school district. So I would start with Gamut and understanding, okay, what are the rules governing my school district? If you go to Gamut and it's a publicly available website, one thing I should offer as a caveat is that it often does require a username and a password. But for the most part, those are available on your school district website. So if you Google like whatever unified or whatever the name of your district is, Gamut, usually this will come up, and it will often have right there on the district website the username and password. It's usually something like username password. It's usually quite simple. But if you can't find it, reach out to your district and ask them. These bylaws are supposed to be available to the public. That's the point of them. And I'm just going to show you a screenshot here of what comes up if I search for West Contra Costa Unified and then search for graduation requirements, because that was something that I was interested in. And you can see that you can read here the whole set of requirements. I mean, you probably know as a high school student what your graduation requirements are because it came home in a letter from your school district. You just kind of know them. But if you want to know them in detail and know exactly what's expected, check it out on Gamut. It might be kind of interesting to you to see what they actually are. And I'm just going to point out that a few things I notice here. I notice that for math, the district requires 30 credits, so 3 years of math. Maybe if, the thing I'm interested in is college and career readiness, I might ask why a 4th year of math is not required. I noticed that there's no FAFSA requirement. So another thing that might be an indication of college and career preparation is that all students are supported to complete a financial aid form. That's not required in this district, so I might ask about that. Go to Gamut, search for things you're interested in. You can search terms like mental health, bullying, academic expectations. They're all there. Okay, terrific. I'm going to move on to reading the plan. Okay, so now you've learned about the data. You kind of understand what the problem is, what the outcomes look like. Generally what the rules are, what the expectations are that the district has set. Now let's talk about the meat, which is what is the district going to do about it? What is its plan to improve college transition rates? Or what is its plan to support student mental health in this post-COVID world? And in general, the place that you can start is with the local control and accountability plan. You probably heard about this from some folks yesterday. This is a plan that's been in place in California for 9 years now, 8 years. And it is required as part of the local control funding formula. It is the place where the district is expected to show how it's spending its money and on what. During COVID, this plan was put aside. So if you're searching for last year's plan, you might not find it. Instead, you'll find something called the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. Also really valuable and useful. I would look at that if that's all you can find. And at the school site level, there's a parallel plan called the Single Plan for Student Achievement that describes what your school's plan is. Usually the school plan aligns with the LCAP. So depending on whether you're interested in trying to affect change at the school level or the district level, you might want to start with one or the other. And the LCAP is a terrific set of hundreds of pages in some cases that will tell you the following things. What are my district's goals and priorities? What are the programs and activities that will help us meet those goals? How are we differentiating services or targeting services for different groups of students? And how does our spending align with all of that? Every district's plan is a little bit different. Some of them create what they call like a user-friendly LCAP. That's an infographic or a flyer version that's supposed to be more readable. Look at that if you can. That's a great place to start. But underneath that user-friendly LCAP is always a much denser document. They're less fun to look at. I will acknowledge that. They can be hundreds of pages long, but that is where the detail often lies. I'm going to show you what this looks like for, if I have a bookmark, yes, for Sacramento City Unified. You can see that this PDF starts with some graphics on the budget. There's the LCFF funding. And then it goes through all these dense tables, pages and pages of tables. I'm not going to go through all of these right now, obviously, but I want you to know that they're there, and keyword searches will be your friend. So use those liberally to find what you're looking for. If I were to search Sacramento City Unified's website, I got that plan by landing here on the LCAP webpage. By law, the LCAP is supposed to be on the district webpage. So start there, look for it. It's also by law supposed to be on the county webpage. So if for some reason you're in a small district that hasn't uploaded it yet, you might look at the county website and you might find it there. And when I dig into that Sac City LCAP, one of the goals that I went and looked for and I found is that they do have a goal that students will be engaged with a safe, physically and emotionally healthy learning environment. So that's good. I know that they're focused on it too. This is something that they're prioritizing. If I keep reading below that goal, I get to a thing called actions and services. And these are some of the really long tables in the LCAP. But what they tell you is what are the specific programs and actions that are in the plan to support that goal? And also, how much are they spending to do that? And again, money signals priorities. So if you see that a district says that it's prioritizing creating safe havens from ICE on campuses, it seems like a really great strategy. I may ask, how much are you spending behind that? $271,000. Well, in a large district, what is that going to buy me? A few personnel? How are we going to support all of the school sites? So these are some of the questions you can ask. You also see that they've said they're going to provide wraparound health and mental health supports. That's terrific. So maybe a follow-up question is, where are they going to be based? How many, what are their caseloads going to be like? Those are some of the questions I might ask based on this LCAP. And then finally, the third section and last section I would suggest you look at closely is the analysis of their goal. And this is a narrative description where the district describes how it thinks it's doing on its goal and how it's going to improve. And here you can see there's a lot of acknowledgement of the impact distance learning has had on student engagement. And so that's good. This goes on for several pages, so you can read it in there more to understand how the district is thinking about it. So your homework will be to search for your district's plan and bookmark it. You can come back to it this week. You can come back to it next year. It'll be important to know that you found it and you can always go back to it as a resource. And as I mentioned, it's often on the district website. A shortcut, just Google your LCAP plus your district name, and lots of times it will come up. So that's how I would start. I'm not going to spend much time talking about how to find promising solutions. However, I just want to acknowledge that a lot of times you need to be a detective to find some solutions that will support your idea. You might have illustrated the problem effectively, but you might want to also pair the problem analysis with some suggestions for what can be done. To get there, I would suggest, of course, Googling the issue, but also speaking with friends, teachers, administrators, or colleagues from your school, your district, or even other schools and districts to find out what they're doing. So if you're interested in increasing college access, finding out what districts are doing that maybe have high college access rates would be a good place to start. Are they doing college visits? Are they supporting financial aid access for all students? Those are some things you could ask about. You can also ask experts. Experts include all the people I named, of course, administrators, teachers, but also researchers and those who are institutions like the Public Policy Institute of California, or PACE, the organization that I work with. EdTrust West is a great set of, they have a great set of reports and staff who know these issues really well. So those are some places that you might want to begin. But the fifth topic here, asking questions, might be your most, your best go-to tool. Because let's be real, a lot of times the things that matter to you are not the things that your school or your district or even the state is measuring or that they're ready solutions for. Probably it matters to you because it's hard. So ask questions. A lot of times you will find that there is some related data that your school or your district or even your teacher is gathering that might be useful to your particular problem, but they don't make it available to the public. Maybe they do regular student well-being surveys, for example. So ask for that data, but importantly, ask questions that ask them to come to you with solutions. You are the stakeholder, they are accountable to you. So if you ask questions like the ones that you see on the screen here from a terrific resource called XQ, that's a school board thing, more resources on their website, you can get some questions to ask. My favorite one is this last one at the bottom of the screen that you can always ask no matter the topic, which is, how are we measuring that? And what are we doing to improve it? So if you don't know what, and if they, if you're talking to the school about something and say, well, what's your idea? And you say, well, how are you thinking about it? How are you measuring it? What are we doing so far? Those are great open-ended questions that put the ball back in their court, because again, they are accountable to you. So now we've gone through this whole toolkit. You've got all the facts, right? But just to complicate things, I have a question for you. Which do you find more convincing? Facts, like the ones we just saw, or stories? We haven't talked a lot about stories. Those include your experiences. So think about it. Which are more convincing? All right, thanks. Okay, about 2/3 of you said facts, and about 23% said stories. About 14% said don't make me choose. Super, super interesting. 75% of you answered this one. Thanks for, first of all, I'm so thrilled that facts matter to you. I wish that were the case more in this world. But something that's worth remembering is that facts will only get us so far. They're so critically important, but as this quote reveals, we are 22 times more likely to remember a fact that's been wrapped in a story. So bring your data, all the data that you've gathered through the tools I shared with you today, but also share your story. You are the person living high school today. You are an expert on it as a result. You might tell your school board that only 50% of students are completing high school with A to G, but if you also tell them the story about your friend who wasn't able to apply to the right sequence, that might help make the case for why a change might be needed. So offer a solution if you have one, wrap your facts in a story, and remember that you are the stakeholder. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back for a minute. I wanted to preview something. This is a new set of data that I didn't originally have in here, but I wanted to introduce it to you because we've talked a lot about advocating before your school board today. What we haven't talked a lot about is how you advocate before your state leaders. And it's really important to remember who represents you in Sacramento, or who represents you in Washington. Who are your elected officials that are responsible actually for setting up an education system that supports and works for all students, including you? And one of the challenges is it's often hard to know exactly who those people are. So I wanted to find out, as we think about directing your advocacy toward the state level, whether you know who represents your school in, say, the California State Assembly. Do you know who your assembly person is for your city and specifically for your school district? So this is our last poll, and if you can provide a quick answer, okay, about 2/3 of you are not don't know, about 14% do, 20% maybe. I'm not surprised. Like I said, these data are really they're hard to find, but one of the many cool things that Ed100 does is it demystifies this complex information, and it has made available some new data on who your elected officials are, your assembly person, your Senate, your state senator, and also who's representing you in Washington. And these data are available by high school. So you can search by high school on the ed100.org website. The link is right there, and you'll see maps like the one on your screen. So I just wanted to leave you with that to offer one more tool as you build your toolkit as an activist, as an advocate, as a decision maker, and as a change maker in your community. These are the resources that we talked about today. I just want to leave them here for a reference. And with that, I want to wrap up my presentation. Thank you for engaging around some complex and weedy information. I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for your presentation and for helping us understand how to merge the quantitative and qualitative to kind of craft impactful solutions after this conference. We have some questions actually for you. And our first question is, so you work a lot with data systems for education, and If you were Harry Potter and had like a magic wand, what would you change about these systems?
Oh, I love the Harry Potter reference. My children are reading the whole series for the second time right now.
Oh, okay.
Well, one of the things that I think is really necessary is to integrate these data systems. It's very difficult to know which data set to go to for which set of questions. It should be, we really need to democratize data a lot more and make it more easily accessible. There is the technology now to do it. We live in a state that has figured out how to do this. In a host of other industries, you can Google virtually anything, but you can't necessarily Google school information in the way you should be able to. So I would merge these systems and create a single interface that makes it easy for people to answer questions that they have about their schools.
Perfect. Awesome. Everett asks, how should data be set aside when the environment was drastically different, for example, with COVID and distance learning?
This is a really important question because a lot of the things we measure because we've always measured them. So we've always measured test scores. We've always measured graduation rates. And so we kind of know how to do that. The data seem reliable and valid, and so we keep gathering them. The thing that we don't do as often is say, what really matters to us today? And how do we change our measurement systems so that we can start measuring those things? And that's where your voice and engagement is really important. Your decision makers need to hear what things matter to you. If the things that matter to you are around relationships, mental health, social and emotional well-being, access to a range of enrichment opportunities, whatever it is, those things are harder to measure and they're less well measured. But as we start to push the conversation, I think we can push our measurement systems too. I think the place to start is at the local level, getting better data at the school site, eventually rolling that up to the district. Eventually that's going to roll up to the state. The state's going to be the last. So let's really push on what matters at the local level and start to shift the conversation.
Got it. Sam asks, what would you change about the school system and how long do you think it would take to make such a change happen?
Well, that's such a big question, and I probably would give different responses at, different points in my career. Right now, I've been doing a lot of work with advocates and researchers around the state on this agenda for reimagining and rebuilding schools as we emerge from the pandemic. Not because the pandemic has changed what school needs to be, but because it's, I think, opened many folks' eyes to the fact that it needed to change a long time ago. And so I would change schools to be more student-centered, meaning schedules that are responsive to students' needs, courses that respond to the things that students are interested in, that really prepare them for what's going to come next in life. I think we need to reimagine the idea of school as a contained space that sits in one space that people go to for a designated amount of time each day. There's a lot of interesting research that's emerging now on what innovation in schooling looks like, but I think the thing that's probably less pronounced than it needs to be is just the role of student voice in determining what that path will be. And I really hope there's new energy in that as we come out of this pandemic and we'll start to see those changes.
I definitely agree, Carrie. Our last question for you is that we've learned a lot from you at this conference and from last year's conference, and it kind of feels like this conference is only a place for students to learn that tools like data systems even exist. Is there something I'm missing, or is there a kind of a way for students to get involved with maybe research in data systems or kind of getting more involved in the behind the scenes aspect of it?
Those are great questions. Of course, there are all kinds of spaces that are already set up. There are your local school boards. I know a lot of school districts have student board members. There are the committees and councils that exist at your local school site. The data should be, part and parcel to all of those things. Whatever group you're in, you can designate the indicators that you're going to measure to follow progress over time, bring data to the table. I was on my school site council as a parent for many years, and I was always the person who said, hey, can we pull up the California school dashboard and look at that and talk about it? It wasn't necessarily part of the agenda. So, in the space that already exists, I would suggest pushing on that. I also, know that you're hearing from many student engagement organizations throughout this conference, and those organizations are always looking for ways to harness student voice and energy around advocacy. As you've learned today, data needs to be part of advocacy. It's not just sharing what we want and need, it's also making the case with information. So I connect to those spaces as well.
Definitely agree. Thank you so much for joining us, Carrie, and we hope you have an awesome day. Thank you so much.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.